Another big story. It's certainly going to be yet another historic day at the Constitutional Court today. This time, judgment will be handed down on the Public Protector's jurisdiction over the CR17 campaign funding investigation. Back in 2019, Advocate Ziyanda Ngcobo finding Ramaphosa to have violated the Executive Ethics Code in his comments in relation to his son's relationship with Bosasa. Ngcobo referred the matter to the National Director of Public Prosecutions to be investigated for possible money laundering. Newsroom Africa's senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo made a debut with her arm with the newspaper a short while ago. She's with us on the round table nonetheless. Great to see you every morning. A lot at stake here. Take us through who the stakeholders are and what they're arguing, because it's not just about Ramaphosa and Ngcobo.
Certainly not. In fact, this has got a lot to do with how the Public Protector's Office operates as a Chapter 9 institution. The key argument here is whether or not the Public Protector's Office has the jurisdiction to investigate the funders or the monies that flow within an internal political party campaign. And of course this stems from those CR17 bank statements. You will recall that the EFF was also party to this matter. They want those bank statements to be unsealed because they believe then that the public should be able to scrutinize who funded President Cyril Ramaphosa in his campaign to become the president, because they believe that actually has a key impact on the democratic order in essence. That's the argument they made. And in fact, it's something that you would have heard EFF leader Julius Malema continuously arguing when it comes to the vaccines, because he's saying that the funders of President Cyril Ramaphosa have links to Aspen, and that's why then, of course, Sinovac and Russia are not part of the vaccines that are being rolled out. Nevertheless, another key argument is that that's coming from investigations unit Amapungane. They were also, amicus curiae of this particular matter, and they were basically saying that the executive members' code in its current form is unconstitutional, because if members of the executive are not obligated by law to declare who their donors are, then there lacks a fundamental transparency, which means then you aren't able to hold members of the executive accountable. But what I find interesting, of course, is that this matter was reserved for judgment in November last year, before the Political Party Funding Act came into action in April this year. So those are the three key arguments that we're expecting to come out of the Constitutional Court. And I think the critical one here, and as you said, it's not about President Cyril Ramaphosa and not necessarily about Ziyanda Ngcobo or whoever occupies that office. It's whether or not then political parties, especially in the context of the political landscape where we are now moving towards coalition politics, where each political party, knowing who has funded those political parties, in order then to be able to say the ethical leadership that the country is looking for, whether or not they themselves, as the contenders within their own political parties, are actually being circumspect when it comes to those issues. I mean, look at what happened with Bosasa. I think that is the example that it was key then to this particular court matter, to say Bosasa was actually getting money by stealing from the state, which means you're stealing the public's money, and yet in the private space you are taking money so that you can fulfill your political ambitions. So that is where the fundamental arguments lie. And I think it's going to be a very interesting judgment because of the Political Party Funding Act coming into motion, but also then what then the jurisdiction of this Chapter 9 institution will be.
Sure.
Ziyanda, what's interesting for me is what we heard the President say when he was on the stand at the State Capture Inquiry. So what he said was that he reiterated his claim that the CR17 campaign managers took the deliberate decision to shield him from the financial contributions to his campaign by donors. I wonder what the court's going to say about that and whether they'll buy that.
Well, I mean, those issues were ventilated. You remember that actually this matter was ventilated in the Pretoria High Court last year, and then they set aside, the public protector's report saying that it was fundamentally flawed according to the law. She did not have the jurisdiction to actually be investigating these bank accounts. She did not say how she got access to these bank accounts, and that she ignored critical evidence that was submitted by the Finance Intelligence Center, which basically dispelled her referring this to be investigated for possible money laundering. This issue of whether or not the president knew or did not know with what was happening with his bank accounts, the argument at the time in court was that, well, he actually then that would be an irresponsible thing for him to do, especially because he was running on the anti-corruption ticket. And so I remember quite distinctly that was one of the arguments that was made by Advocate Moses Kakane, who was representing Ziyanda Ngcobo, as well as Vincent Maleka, who's representing the EFF, to say you cannot divorce, especially if you're campaigning for the highest office in the land, your private activities from what you do in public, because once you become a public figure, running for such an important office, the two are one and the same thing.
Especially in a context of such rampant corruption like South Africa.
Exactly.
It goes without saying. It's another judgment we're going to speak about for quite some time. Ziyanda Ngcobo, thanks very much indeed for painting that context so well for us. You can look out for Ziyanda throughout the day, no doubt, as we break down whatever the court has to say at around 10 o'clock. In just a moment, when we come back, we're still speaking about the Constitutional Court. It's being hailed for consolidating its authority in the Zuma matter, but is it possible for this court to inadvertently find itself in the middle of political mudslinging? We'll unpack that aspect of the big stories next.